Timer airplane mode. Phone on airplane mode. Is it?
Sure. Let me just put mine on airplane mode then.
All right. Awkward. I'll move it a bit forward. All right.
Make sure you can see us.
Your head's cut off.
You're
You can
right.
just crouch.
Here, we can just here.
I'll
Watch
just
this.
speak like
Yeah. Okay. Can you see your head?
So
Yeah.
you're too tall.
Now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good now. Or you can tilt the screen here. There we go. Yeah. That's good. That's good.
I'm a
I got it.
Biocom.
All right. Cool. I'll give everybody a second. Great. Ready? All right. Before I get into it, I'd like to extend brief blanket of thanks to everybody in this room. First of all, judges, you probably have something better to be doing. We're glad you're here. Second of all, my opponents, congratulations on making it this far, guys. We're glad you're here to make this debate possible. Third of all, my partner for being a great partner and great friend. Thanks, buddy. All right, let's do this. With that, I'm going to start time right now. My partner and I are proud to affirm the resolve the United States federal government should institute a federal program for the purchase and destruction of second-hand firearms. So before I get into this, I'm going to define second-hand firearms. So essentially, simple definition, second-hand firearms are firearms that have been sold twice. Like if I go and buy a gun from a store and then I sell it to somebody else, now it's a second-hand firearm. I bought it. It's been sold to a consumer twice. Whether that's legally or on the black market, and that's our definition for second-hand firearms. Now I'm going to get into our plan. So essentially, this is the plan. This is our plan text. The United States federal government is going to pass essentially a program based on the program used in Australia, which allows each state and territory to establish and operate. I misspoke. In which the federal government is going to operate a system through which gun owners and dealers are going to surrender their prohibited weapons in return for compensation, and these weapons are going to be destroyed. This is going to happen as soon as possible, and this plan is going to be financed through the United States federal government is going to buy the guns for 1.5 times their retail value, and the plan will be financed through the sale of United States Treasury bonds. And with that, I'm going to get into some solvency. So essentially, Australia has a program like this, which is called buyback, which allows for the government to buy the handguns so they aren't sold on the black market. And according to the New York Times, Australia has the lowest homicide rate with firearms in the world after implementing this program. And keeping that in mind, I'm going to move on to my first contention, which is under this paper, and which is that of domestic violence. Okay, subpoint 1, abused women are more likely to be killed by their abuser if the abuser owns a firearm. That's from the Wall Street Journal. Card 2, domestic violence assaults involving a gun are 12 times more likely to result in a death than those involving no gun. That's from the Wall Street Journal again. Card 3, more than 2/3 of the spouse and ex-spouse homicide victims between 1980 and 2008 were killed with second-hand firearms. That's from the New York Times. Card 4, according to the United States Department of Justice and the National Crime Victimization Survey, it found that people in households with firearms were 7 to 10 times more likely to be accused of domestic violence or homicide. Essentially, the link to this is simple. It's pretty clear that households with firearms are more likely to have domestic violence. It's pretty clear that firearms, secondhand firearms specifically, play into domestic violence a lot. And the links to this are simple. By incentivizing people to give up their secondhand firearms, by destroying these secondhand firearms that would otherwise be sold on the black market and end up in these people's hands, we're reducing domestic violence. Sorry, just skipping back to framework because I missed this. Round weight on net benefits. Cool. So we're winning under net benefits in this case because less domestic violence is a benefit. I'll take your question if I have time at the end. All right, cool. Okay, cool. My second contention is of minorities, and we've seen that people who essentially we've seen that firearms have been used to inflict harms on minorities. Essentially, we see that throughout the nation, Caucasians have twice as many guns in total as African Americans and Hispanics, and that's according to the Pew Research Center. And we can even see, and according to the same study, Caucasians are 3 times more likely to kill a minority. So essentially, we see that passing the plan simply means less minorities being killed. We see that passing the plan simply helps reduce simply stops minorities from being killed due to racism, and we see less minorities die, and an impact of this is we see less minorities die, and we see minorities don't feel disenfranchised by the United States because, yes, link impacts are pretty simple in that case. Cool, moving on to my third contention, which is fascism. So essentially, now let's look at what fascist and fascism really is. Essentially, if you're a fascist, you employ people to make war. What you do is you want to take over land and you want to take over areas, so your sole purpose is to employ people and to create like bodies that will make war and will give you more land. So essentially, we see that essentially what we're doing by banning second-hand firearms is we're destroying some of the artifacts of fascism, and because of this, we're fighting against fascism. A few cards. The NRA says that a well-regulated militia the NRA is a group that says a well-regulated militia is necessary for the security of free people. If we and what we see is a lot of fascists associate themselves with the NRA. We see that by fighting this, we're essentially going against fascism. We see that gun advocates in America have been more and more absolutist from the New York Times, so we're fighting against this too. And we see that gun owners are more likely to be right-wing. Pew Research Center. So essentially, we're fighting against fascism by passing this plan and by destroying these second-hand firearms. And that's going to bring me right into my fourth contention, which is that of the black market. So let's talk about the Armory, which is a website on Tor. Tor, if you guys don't know about it, is essentially a web browser that redirects your IP address from many different countries, so you can't be tracked on the internet. So essentially what it does is it makes it much, much harder for government agencies and law enforcement to track people's activity online. And the Armory is a website on Tor which sells guns, and it's essentially a black market website that allows people to order guns. And it began as an offshoot as the Silk Road, and it's still up to date. An analysis by Professor Matthew Hinckley of Stanford University shows that most of these weapons are handguns from the most of the handguns on the Armory are secondhand weapons from the United States. So we see that the largest black market in the world, a black market online worldwide that sells handguns and sells guns to people, is essentially like most of the handguns from there are from the United States and are secondhand weapons. In addition to this, according to analysis by Forbes, guns sold on the black market of smaller size, such as handguns, only retail for $100 to $200 more than their legal price. That essentially means it doesn't cost very much for somebody to illegally obtain a gun and have no legal trace of them having a gun. And in addition to this, the Atlantic describes secondhand guns as readily available on the street in a report about gang violence. So essentially, we see that the links of this plan are simple. By destroying secondhand weapons and collecting more secondhand weapons, we're going to stop. We're gonna stop these guns from going on the Armory and getting distributed illegally worldwide. We're gonna stop the people who aren't supposed to get guns legally from getting guns on the black market by increasing the price of secondhand guns because there are going to be less of them. In addition to this, we're going to solve the problem that secondhand guns are readily available on the street, decreasing gang violence. The impacts of this are huge and all across the board. You're seeing less violence in the United States of America, and that's why you're voting F under net benefits.
What's your order? So, 3 off and then on. And it's kind of a lot. Is it okay if I go kind of fast? It's not really
I'll call up here if you talk too fast. Off and on, you said?
Yes. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Starting time now. First is the business confidence. The uniqueness is that the economy is increasing but fragile in the status quo. One, you can look to the Baltic Dry Index, which is up 4.71%, which shows that there's increased shipping. Businesses are more confident in shipping their products across the seas. Two, according to the Organization for Econ Cooperation and Development, there has been no dip in business confidence in the last 6 months in the United States. Three, the Conference Board, which tracks and publishes major economic indicators, says that growth in the Employment Trends Index has slowed in the past 6 months, which indicates that slower job growth is possible in the months ahead. Four, the Chicago Board Options Exchange Volatility Index, also known as the Fear Index, jumped in average to its highest level since 2011, which shows that the economy is slowly improving, but people are still scared after the 2008 recession. There's still fear, there's still volatility, and it's still fragile. Now onto the links. The plan basically destroys business confidence and cuts spending and hiring. Why? Because there are many, besides the illegal, like the armory and stuff like that, there are many legal businesses that sell these secondhand firearms that, like, you can put them online and sell them on a market, and then people can buy them legally. And so this basically hurts their business confidence and hurts the business confidence of gun producers everywhere, because now they'll realize that the United States is taking a harsher position on guns. We won't be able to sell our secondhand guns anymore. People won't be buying from us, which means that hurts business confidence, which means they have to lay off workers in order to maintain their price margin. This initial shock basically pushes the economy over the brink at the point where we mentioned how the economy is fragile, and basically it forces businesses to reallocate resources, cut down workers, and try and maintain a profit margin for this initial shock after the plan passes. So now to the internal links. First, business confidence is key to employment. At the point where we see that these businesses are going to be laying off workers in order to maintain their price margin, then through the plan, because businesses will perceive the United States as taking action against guns, not just secondhand retailers, but firsthand retailers will have to lay off their workers in order to maintain price margins. Two, business confidence is key to consumer spending and investor confidence, because when investors and consumers see businesses laying off workers, they're actually going to decrease their investment and their buying. And business confidence is also key to private sector growth. So now to the impacts. First is unemployment. You can see that there will be an increase in unemployment because businesses will be laying off workers. An increase in employment by 10% leads to an additional of 128 suicides per month, a 25% increase in cardiovascular disease, and a 13 to 18% increase in divorce. Number two, there's an increase in poverty. As you can see, that living standards will go down, the value of life will go down as there will be workers and more people in this economic recession, because many businesses are shutting down. This initial shock will actually hurt both consumers and investors. This will lead to a collapse cycle, which is my third impact. The president of Iceland in 2008 stated that a collapse in business confidence is the reason why his economy collapsed and caused the collapse cycle in 2008, which shows that there will be an economic collapse cycle that will make this unemployment and poverty even worse. Now onto our second disadvantage about the election: uniqueness. One, Hillary's in the lead, but the margin is narrowing. The basic point is that currently, according to the New York Times, CBS, and 538, Clinton is about 6% above Trump. In the last 2 months, Trump has been cut a double-digit lead for Hillary Clinton down to single digits. Yeah, so he's cutting the lead. He's inching closer to Clinton. Also, 2 months ago, Clinton had an 11% lead. Now it's largely undermined. But that lead has shrunk into single digits. So on to the link level. One. Basically, the plan passes, which is a liberal move by basically banning all these guns, and they themselves talk about how gun advocates are right-leaning, which makes the central Republicans and right-leaning Republicans mad and more likely to shift support away from Hillary Clinton. There are many people on the brink between Trump and Clinton. Again, you can see how the Republicans in the status quo are like leaning towards Clinton and saying like, we don't really support Trump, so we're going to vote Clinton. Their plan will actually shift their support back to Donald Trump. That shows that the democratic policies are actually taking away what they believe are their rights and what they really advocate for, like they say. And so the second link is that Trump will use his plan as a rallying point against a liberal agenda. He's already made statements about his unwavering support for the Second Amendment and like threatening to kill, asking people to kill Hillary Clinton with guns and stuff like that. Onto the internal links. One, Trump is bad with global warming. Clinton will solve. Clinton has campaigned on major energy goals and dramatically decrease U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by the mid-century. As Secretary of State, she appointed Todd Stern as America's first ever special envoy, and she has also pledged $100 billion annually in global aid during the Copenhagen Summit. So what are the impacts? One is going to be extinction. At the point where we see that Donald Trump is going to be elected, he will not have the same kind of policies as Clinton, which means that she does not have the same positions on energy and things like that, which will mean that this will lead to a biodiversity collapse, because we are already reaching the breaking point of the environment. And if Donald Trump doesn't pass these policies that Clinton is suggesting, that will lead to a decrease in biodiversity, a decrease in global warming, and more pollution, and no regulations, which will actually slowly hurt the ecosystem and cause keystone species to become extinct, which leads to extinction. So now onto our counterplan. Where's my counterplan? The counterplan. The United States federal government will require firearm dealers to implement background checks for secondhand firearm purchases. The U.S. federal government will require firearm dealers to implement background checks for secondhand firearm purchases. This is mutually exclusive, also functionally competitive. The net benefit is the disadvantages and the solvency. I'll go into that now. So on to the affirmative team's case. First, on their plan, on their solvency sheet, they have no solvency because of the black market. You can look to how the black market will still exist and how black market guns are expected to increase 300% in cost because firearms are now more desirable, and also risk will be taken despite the program passing because of the surge in prices. Like they say, people really need and want their guns. The reason why a black market exists is because people want their guns. When we actually decrease the supply of guns, there will be a further increase in demand. This is basic economics, which means that they will create a black market when there's a shortage of goods in the economy. So this also, their plan also has no solvency because in Baltimore in 1974 implemented a similar buyback program, but gun homicides and assaults actually increased under the 2-month program. And also, like, criminals will just steal guns for money, which will, in order to just get some more money for the buyback program, which means that they don't actually solve the impacts that they list. Now to their first ad about domestic violence, this is not unique at the point where they talk about how there's always, like, it's sure, no more secondhand guns, but there will still be first-hand guns. You can just buy a gun. Also, they have no solvency because, yeah, I said that already. And also, we solve for this because we have background checks to prevent this. Also, on the second point about minorities, they talk about decreasing minorities disenfranchisement. This is not unique. We actually turn this point against them because with Trump being elected, that will actually hurt these minorities that Trump oppresses. Now onto the third point about fascism. This is also non-unique because there will always be these people with fascist ideals, like they don't need guns in order to believe these things. Also, they have no link because guns will always exist. They're not destroying artifacts of fascism. They will still exist. They're only destroying secondhand artifacts of fascism. And also, they talk about gun advocates being more absolutist. This links to the ticks. Now on to their last point about the black market. Again, I've already answered how the black market will always exist. They're only going to increase the black market because they're decreasing the supply of guns, which means that more people go in armory. Then there's no possible way that they can solve because the government can't go onto these armory tour websites and actually prevent this. Thank you.
Girl.
No prep, guys. Let's go.
What's the order, please?
Let's see. I'll go your case and my case.
Guys,
Alright, sorry. In order?
Yeah.
you know what the identify test? Can you not have the identity discussion between
Our case and your case?
Yep.
Yes, sounds good.
Alright, cool. I already said I'd go mega.
like neg in the same order he did?
Yeah. I'll just go down the flow. Alright. Is everyone ready? Alright, cool. Without any further ado, I'll just start time now.
The first argument they make is about business confidence, except turn the link right here. It doesn't hurt business confidence because the government, we said in our plan, is paying 1.5 times in the retail value, so they still make money on this. It won't hurt business confidence at all. They can still sell these guns, and they make more money with selling it to the federal government because we even said in our plan that we're having it 1.5 times the retail value. So turn that link. That disadvantage doesn't stand. The second disadvantage is about the election. But 90% of Americans support wider background checks and less guns, meaning your link fails right there. The fact of the matter is that people already support less guns. Your entire thing is about how because of the fact that we're making a gun, we're passing this plan, which is going to be better for Republicans. However, this doesn't stand because of the fact that Americans already support less guns, meaning your link there is turned. You don't actually have that argument. Now your CP was about background checks. You list no advantages, no reason to vote for the CP. Take that down right there. All right, cool. Let's go to our case. The first thing that you talk about is that the black market still increases. Again, we're paying them more than the retail value that they have, so they're still they won't be this black market because now they can get more money by selling them to the government, meaning that the black market doesn't increase, it actually decreases. Now, the first contention we talked about domestic violence, and you brought up that it was first-hand guns do more, or we were talking about first-hand guns, but our stats were specifically on second-hand guns. Look to our stats, you'll see that's true. Alright, cool. Minorities argument, I didn't hear any refutation because I spoke too fast, so explain that in your next speech. I'm not sure what exactly you guys said. Just explain that next speech so that my partner can refute it later. Third contention was about fascism. What happened? Alright, whatever.
whatever. So third contention was fascism. I don't really care about fascism. This was checked back to ensure that they didn't run a critique, so that we had a critical argument. I don't really I don't really care about it. All right, cool. Now go to the fourth contention. They say that it doesn't exist, but again, I already refuted that. They say that the black market will always exist and that we're increasing. I already refuted that on the top of the case. All right, cool. So there's a couple of reasons why you're going to be voting. There's a couple of reasons why you're going to be voting off. The first reason is because they don't actually give you any advantages to their plan, meaning that their plan actually won't. There's no reason to vote for their CP, meaning that second reason you're going to be voting for us is because of the fact that I've turned the links on both of their disadvantages. The first one, they talked about business confidence, but again, if we're paying them 1.5 times in the actual retail value, then that doesn't hurt business confidence because they're still going to be selling these guns. Second one, they talked about the election, but again, 90% of Americans support less guns, meaning your link fails right there. The only link that you have there is because of the fact that we're implementing the system that now Republicans can use that as a way to get people to buy less, or can use that as a move against liberals. But again, the fact of the matter is that 90% of Americans support less guns, meaning your link fails right there. All right, cool. The third reason you're going to be voting for us is the fact of domestic violence. Extend our statistics on there where we talked about how abused women are more likely to be killed by their abuser if the abuser owns a firearm. We talked about that. We also talked about how domestic violence assaults involving a gun are 12 times more likely to result in death than those involving what? Yeah, involving a secondhand guns are 12 times more likely to result in death than those involving no guns at all, which was from the Washington Post. Furthermore, we talked about how more than 2/3 of ex-spouse homicides between 1980 and 2008 were killed with secondhand firearms. That was again New York Times, meaning that you're still going to be voting on domestic violence because we're putting this program into place. That means that there's going to be less domestic violence because they want to get more money on these guns, so they're going to sell it away. Cool. The fourth reason you're going to be voting for us is the black market. They tell you that it'll increase. However, I give you specific reasons as to why it won't. The fact of the matter is that we're paying more for these guns than they would get in the black market. Meaning, they're not going to go to the black market now, but they're rather going to sell these guns to the government. The black market won't increase, but rather decrease, and that's almost the biggest reason you're going to be voting. That's the biggest reason you're going to be voting affirmative in today's round, because of the fact that the black market causes so many problems. Look to that contention. We talked about... hold up. Alright, cool. We talked about how... That's not the right contention. Okay, we talked about how, according to analysis by the Forbes, guns on the black market are of smaller rise, such as handguns, only retail for $100 to $200 more than their legal price. We also talked about how the Atlantic describes secondhand guns as readily available on the street in a report. So basically, what we're saying is that by ensuring that there's less black market, that's going to be great for everyone, because now without these black market guns, there won't be all this problem with gangs who buy these guns on the black market. And so essentially, you're voting for us on a couple of key reasons. The fact that I've turned both their contentions, turned both their contentions, you're voting for us. The fact that they give you no advantages to their plan, you're also voting for us because they don't give you a reason to negate. Also, you're going to be voting for us on the black market because of the fact that we're the only ones in this round actually trying to solve for the black market. And the fourth reason you're going to be voting for us is domestic violence, because we ensure that less domestic violence happens. So with that, I urge a strong negation vote.
Okay, I'm going off and on CP and the two VAs and all their ads.
So just add in order?
Yeah.
Okay.
And all the ads are in order too. Everybody ready? Ready?
Can you work it? Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so I'll be starting my time now. So first with the counter plan, that their only refute to our counter plan was that we have no advantages, so you can't vote on the counter plan. We don't need advantages to the counter plan. The counter plan is a reason that you don't vote for the regular plan. Our disads prove that you shouldn't vote for their plan, that it's not preferable, so therefore our counter plan still exists. Now, on to our two advantages. Our first one being that of business confidence. So their only thing to say this is that, turn their link, because with our buyback program, you're actually increasing business confidence because the businesses get the money. Businesses don't make these secondhand guns and then sell them to the buyers. That's not how these businesses that make these secondhand guns work. Those secondhand guns are sold by individuals. So from their plan, the individuals themselves will be getting the money in a second, its projected time. The individuals themselves will be getting the money, not the businesses. So their business confidence doesn't actually increase the business confidence doesn't increase at all, and it actually decreases. So you can flow through all our impacts of unemployment, poverty, and the collapse cycles. Okay, I'll accept your PY now.
You just said businesses don't make secondhand guns. Nobody makes secondhand
Exactly.
guns.
That's what I'm trying to prove to you, is that they're not going to be making these guns and then selling them to people that they're not selling them back to the government. People are the ones with the secondhand guns. Not even right now. People are the ones with the secondhand. People are the ones with the secondhand guns that sell them, so they're the ones making the money. This has nothing to do with business confidence. So the businesses aren't the ones making the guns. So next on to our election disadvantage. So they're only refuting this when they brought up some random statistics in their second speech about how 90% of Americans actually support restrict gun laws. But what we're trying to prove is that there's a break right now. Hillary and Trump are extremely close, as we proved by all our statistics in our first speech. So what we're going to be doing if we pass their plan is pushing all of those brink Republicans that may vote for Hillary, may vote for Trump, we don't know, that we're pushing them to the Republican side. So therefore, if we pass their plan, we're pushing these brink Republicans, and then that will lead to a Trump's election, and therefore all our impacts of extinction, biodiversity collapse, and those impacts. So, next on to their plan text. So, their refute was that the black market... Please be quiet a little bit. Okay, so their only refute to our no solvency arguments was that, well, the black market won't exist, so that will get rid of all the no solvency argument. But the black market will exist, as they said themselves. We can't just the black market is untraceable. People on the black market are untraceable. You can't just go to the black market and shut it down because the government, as they said, it's untraceable themselves. So you can't just eliminate the black market. Also, they never touched on our no solvency report about the Baltimore 2004 proof that the buyback program increases homicide. So you can flow that through and extend that through because they never touched the Baltimore point. Now, just for lulz, I'll touch on the fascism at first because they just totally dropped that, which is pretty funny. Okay, so that's dropped. Next, on to domestic violence. So that is non-unique because there will always be sexism in our community. That's just how the unfortunate world works. And there will always be men who commit these atrocious horrors of domestic violence. Okay, atrocious horrors of domestic violence. So, reducing the, limiting gun control, increasing gun control, won't change it. There will still be these horrible men who commit these horrible acts of domestic violence. So
taking away their guns doesn't change.
Yeah, taking away their guns doesn't change their mindset of sexism. So so their whole advantage of domestic violence is non-unique. Okay. So next on to their minorities advantage. So basically all they said. So we turned this up. We turned this because their view was that the election disadvantage that they had no longer exists because of their review. But as I already protected our election advantage, you can again turn their minority advantage because Trump will hurt minorities. He has all this bad sentiment toward minorities, so you can turn all their impacts toward our side because of our election disadvantage. So like all this disenfranchisement, all this racism and stuff, you can turn that towards our side. Next, on to the black market point. As they basically said that the black market will still exist. People will still be getting guns off this. It's still bad. So basically, as I already refuted, the black market can't be shut down magically. You can't just as they said themselves, it's untraceable. You can't just shut it down. It's gone. Now there's no more secondhand guns. It's over. That's not how the black market works. So the black market will always exist. We're not getting rid of the black market because it doesn't work like that. So now already just from the fascism. So now back to what I've said. I've proved that our CP still stands because the function of a CP. Okay, because the function of our CP is as a proof that you don't vote for the affirmative plan, and that's why our disads prove that their plan isn't preferable. So our CP solves entirely for their case. They drop the solvency of our CP. So I've also reiterated how BizCon still stands because basically I proved that businesses aren't the ones creating the guns and selling them. It's the individuals themselves. So business confidence will decrease and lead to all our impacts. I have proven that our correct our election point because it's all these brink Republicans that are moving from the brink to the Republican side, and therefore therefore electing Trump and leading to all his bad impacts. I've proved that their CP has no solvency because of the black market and because of their plan has no solvency. Because of the black market existing and because of the Baltimore evidence. I've proved that domestic violence will exist anyways because of the atrocious men who are performing these horrible acts of domestic violence. Taking guns away from them won't change anything. I proved that racism towards minorities will still exist because of Trump's election, and he has all these bad sentiment towards minorities, and I refuted their black market points because the black market will still exist and you can't randomly shut it down. Thank you.
Okay, so first, overview, then BizCon, then the ticks.
Tom Thomas run finals.
They are.
Thomas are in finals.
They got VK on 3-0.
Let's go on with the round. Let's go on with the round.
So after the overview, it's going to be BizCon, and then the ticks, and then the ads in order, and then I'll just do some impact link. That sound good? Okay, everyone ready? Okay, starting time now. First for the overview. The disadvantages clearly link. They only provide one response for each disadvantage, which my partner has refuted, which means that the disadvantages link, and they've not refuted the solvency of our counterplan and not refuted the counterplan and shown why it does not solve for the affirmative team's case, which means that if there's a risk that the disadvantages link to the affirmative team's case, then that means that you're automatically voting for the negative because the counterplan is an opportunity cost to the plan. If there's a 1% chance that the disadvantages happen, then that has massive magnitude impacts and also proves why the counterplan has a net benefit to the plan. So now I'm going to move on to the disadvantages. First, business confidence. Their only response is that this will actually increase business confidence, because these businesses that are selling these secondhand guns are going to sell their secondhand guns to the government. This is not how it works. These businesses are actually selling these secondhand guns to individuals, not to the U.S. federal government. And even if you don't buy that argument, that there are still other links that show why business confidence will still decrease, because you can look to guns in general. It's as I mentioned in my first speech, how there's a general perception about guns and about how companies will actually, who don't necessarily sell secondhand guns, but also sell guns firsthand, basically decrease business confidence because they will see that the U.S. federal government is taking a stance against guns. This goes unrefuted. If you don't buy the fact that our first link still stands, our second link proves that there will still be an initial shock, which will lead to the collapse cycle. Now to the second disadvantage about the elections. Their only refutation is that 90% of Americans support these wider background checks. That's what our counterplan does. They do something totally different with the buyback program. And again, it's the 10% that matters. It's the fact that the election is super close and that there are some Republicans that are leaning towards Hillary. And by initiating the plan of the affirmative team, that harsh measure against guns, which is unexpected by the American people, will shift these Republicans on the fence back away from Clinton and back towards Trump. Which will lead to that's the only refutation. Which means that the impacts of extinction and biodiversity collapse because of Trump's policies flow through. Now onto the advantages. So first, we talked about how they have no solvency again because of the black market, and about how there's going to be an increase in demand. Again, they don't refute this. This is basic economics. When there's a decrease in supply, there's an increase in demand, which means that they don't actually solve for the black market. Now to the domestic violence point. I need to clarify this. But we're saying that the fact that you're taking away these guns doesn't change the fact that people will be violent, and it doesn't change the fact that just because they don't have a gun doesn't change their mentality or change their mindset towards the way they view the world. So just because somebody doesn't have a secondhand gun that they bought doesn't mean that they'll go out and commit murders, and doesn't mean that they will commit acts of domestic violence, which are all incredibly terrible, but the affirmative team doesn't solve for, because they don't. Taking away somebody's guns doesn't change the way they act. They can just go buy one, right? It doesn't have to be a second-hand gun. It can be a first-hand gun. They don't even need a gun in their house to have that kind of horrible mindset to do those kinds of things, which means that this point is not solved for by the affirmative team's plan. And onto the second point about the minorities. Again, we solve for this point, and because we have these background checks, also we turn this point against them because we talk about why they're only going to be hurting these minorities because of the election of Donald Trump, and about how these minorities will further be oppressed by his policies, as we've shown to him talking about mass deportation and stuff like that. So again, this turns against them. And the black market point, again, we turn this against them. We show why there's going to be an increase in the black market because of basic economics, decrease in supply, increase in demand. And so at the end of the day, looking at the overall picture and the net benefit of this debate, we can see that all of their advantages are non-unique at the point where they aren't doing, and they don't have solvency for their advantages, at the point where they're just taking away guns. They're not going to solve for domestic violence. They're not going to solve for the black market. They're not going to solve for minorities. They actually make things worse by actually hurting more minorities and hurting the and increasing the black market and making it harder and harder for the U.S. federal government to take control of these guns that are being sold. At the end of the day, if there's a risk that a collapse cycle will happen, if there's a risk that an environmental collapse will happen, which definitely is because they only provide one response for each of my disadvantages, our disadvantages, that means that those disadvantages flow through. There's a very large risk that these disadvantages will happen. Even if you don't buy that, if there's a 1% risk that the environment will collapse because Donald Trump is elected, if there's a 1% risk that the economy will collapse because people who sell guns everywhere, businesses who sell guns everywhere, will actually have to lay off workers initially in order to maintain the shock of the affirmative team's plan, and that means that completely outweighs any marginal impacts that the affirmative team has. Like all of their impacts are non-unique, and also their impacts are turned against them. So at the end of the day, we can see that the negation team clearly outweighs the affirmative when they have non-unique impacts or their impacts are turned against them, and we have the risk of a collapse cycle in an environment, which means that our counterplan is a preferable option to the affirmative team's plan, which is a clear vote for the negation. Thank you.
Everybody good?
Yep.
Cool. Roadmap. I'm going to talk about 4 things, and just three things about the round, and then just kind of end it. Trying to bring it all together. Trying to talk about 3 topics a little bit that come between this round and bring it all together at the end. And with that, I will start my time right now. Okay, so essentially the first thing I want to talk about in today's round is the trend of weak links in my opponent's case. And I'd like to point out that it doesn't matter how many refutations we have to their links, it just matters, the quality of our refutations matters. So even if we have one good refutation to their link, that doesn't, ends all their links. And while they may have, their warrants and impacts may be supported by statistics, we see that their argument falls apart at the link, and because of this, you can't take any of it into account. Let's talk about their 2 links. The first one of which is business confidence. I have 2 responses to this. First of all, when their second speaker came up here, I asked him a question. I'm like, hey, how do you, do businesses sell secondhand guns? And he said, no, businesses don't sell secondhand guns. That's the whole point of this. If businesses don't sell secondhand guns, I ask you, judges, how does the United States federal government buying guns decrease business confidence? He literally came up here and told you that businesses and secondhand guns aren't related at all. My partner and I were looking at each other like, what's going on? He literally came up here and said that, and that's why we're winning this link no matter what. Even though the first speaker came up and said the opposite thing, now they're contradicting themselves, and that's unfair to us. So no matter what, we're seeing that this link is intrinsically there, and we're winning. The second response I have to this, even if you're still deciding to consider that link, is that of capitalism. Judges, this is the second time I've said this in this debate tournament. Businesses want money. That's why they're businesses. And because the federal government is buying the guns for 1.5 times their retail value, businesses will continue to sell secondhand guns to the federal government. That's simple. That went unrefuted.
You mentioned that this will actually increase business confidence, but you don't give the reasoning of capitalism behind why businesses are going to go and
I never said the word capitalism, but my partner did say that businesses will continue to want to sell secondhand guns because it's 1.5 times the retail value. I think that's capitalism, and you shouldn't call me out for I think selling a gun is good enough for capitalism. So essentially, that's my response to that. Judges, it's up to you.
Let's keep going.
I'm going to move on. Cool. Now let's move on to their second link of their second argument, which is essentially that fringe Republicans are going to move over to Trump. Judges, if you, judges, you're going to vote affirmative this round if you agree that 90% of Americans is greater than the number of fringe Republicans. Judges, if you believe that more than 90% of Americans are fringe Republicans, then sure, vote for them. But we are saying, we provided you stats that show that 90% of Americans will support this decision. That's going to be a stat that says that 90% of Republicans will also be incentivized to support Hillary's side. They never refuted that link. They just said fringe Republicans are going to get pushed over. We said 90% of Americans are going to get pushed the other way, which outweighs, and they never refuted that. In addition to this, fringe Democrats will get pushed over too. So we see that this link is super.
Most of the time, the idea that fringe Democrats will get pushed over too is new.
Okay, cool. Drop that. It's still weak. Cool. Now let's talk about their counterplan. They say that their counterplan solves, but they don't give you any solvency ever in their whole argument. They essentially state a counterplan, then don't talk about it ever. They don't give you advantages. They don't give you solvency. So counterplan's not going to be an issue in this debate round. Oh my God, my partner said that.
You only mentioned that we don't have advantages to a counterplan. You don't talk about why you have no solvency.
You brought up. I'm refuting your refutation. So I'm allowed to do that in my last speech, I believe. It's up to you,
Under consideration.
Yeah, that's just up to you guys, judges. Okay, cool. Now the third thing I want to talk about is Baltimore, and they brought up this stat about Baltimore. Judge, we see that this essentially is moot. It doesn't matter in today's round because we brought up a competing statistic about Australia that's actually better. So essentially the two pieces of evidence at most cancel itself, and at best, since Australia is a larger country, there's more people than Baltimore, our stat outweighs theirs. So you see that pretty much the only three reasons why you would vote for them, their links, their counterplan, and the stat about Baltimore, are super weak. And with that, I'm going to go into the last thing which I want to talk about, which is weighing this round under net benefits. So let's look at their world, which essentially is no net benefits because pretty much their plan is every link in their case is weak, so you can't weigh any of it, and we've shown you that. Now let's look into our case. First of all, let's talk about domestic violence. They've one response to this. They have two responses to this. First one, they say the world is sexist, so we can't do anything. Judge, sure, yes, the world is sexist, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help that. The affirmative side's trying to do something against that. They're not. We're winning on that. In addition to this, they showed that taking away people's guns doesn't change people's mindsets. Yes, it doesn't change people's mindsets, but it takes away the weapons that people use to kill other people. So we're still solving there. Let's talk about the black market. Again, they said the same response for the black market. There's always going to be a black market. We're doing something to stop it. They're not. We're winning on that. In addition to this, they say that because of economics and there'll be more demand, the black market will grow. But there will be less guns to sell on the black market. They're trying to mask the fact that we're stopping guns, physical guns, from getting into people's hands through these stats about economics.
The idea that there's going to be a decrease in physical guns was not brought up.
Okay, when I said guns, I meant physical guns, not metaphorical guns. I think that's reasonable and that can be implied, and we didn't need to state that the guns we're talking about are physical, and that's why I think you should still vote on that point. Cool. Cool, great. I'm gonna continue time. I've about 30 seconds left. Cool. Now let's talk about the last main point. We dropped fascism. Let's talk about the last main point why you're gonna vote for us today, and that's minorities. And their only argument against that. First of all, they didn't refute it throughout the whole round, except in my opponent's last speech. That's okay. We're fine with it. Their argument about their only refutation against it was that Donald Trump is going to be worse for minorities. We already showed you that that doesn't matter because their link is super weak, and because they have no case and we're winning under net benefits because we have a case. We're winning this debate round. I strongly urge an affirmative vote. Thank you. Good debate.
Good debate. Good debate.
Best final ever.
All right. Thank you for judging.
Yeah. Back, I don't.